Hi everyone. It's so great to see you. Um, Thank you for joining us today. I'm really happy to have such a diverse group of people on the call today. Can you all hear me? Maybe just wave, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Great, thanks. It's really nice to see you. Thank you for joining. I'm Nicole Miller, an editor for Underwater New York, and we are thrilled to have people from all over the US and around the world on the call today. I think we have a really diverse mix of artists and scholars and those interested in the sea and water more generally. So we'll have a really kind of interesting mix of people discussing this film today. So it's great. I'm just going to ask you all to keep yourself muted for the time being, since we'll have a large group. That would be helpful to us. And I want to offer a brief introduction to Underwater New York and to our conversation partners today, Eleanor Paynter and Giulia Bertoluzzi. So I'll introduce them, and then I'll say something about the structure of our conversation. Underwater New York is a multidisciplinary creative platform inspired by the waters of New York City. And for 11 years, we've curated a list of objects found in our waterways, and that list serves as a prompt for many of the stories that we publish or produce. We have a particular interest in transdisciplinary collaboration, and we partner with galleries, with museums, curatorial groups, academic institutions, to sort of work on a number of different projects. And so we invite you to check out our projects and our biannual publications on our website, underwaternewyork.com. So we first learned about Giulia Bertoluzzi's documentary, Strange Fish, from Eleanor Paynter, today's moderator. And we were really drawn to this film as a portrait of collaboration, care, and collective remembering among a group of fishermen in Zarzis, Tunisia. And so we were really thrilled to have a chance to speak with Giulia, the filmmaker, today. Because I want to jump right into our conversation, I'm going to introduce the two of them very briefly, and then you can find out more information about them on our website. Giulia Bertoluzzi is a journalist working in Italy, North Africa, and the Sahel. She's co-founder of Nawart Press, a collective of independent journalists. She's collaborated on several award-winning documentary projects, and Strange Fish is her most recent film. It was released in 2018 and has received several awards, including the EU's Media Migration Award. Eleanor Paynter is a migration studies scholar based in the US whose work focuses on Mediterranean mobilities and migration to and through Italy. This fall, she'll join Cornell University's new Migrations Lab as a postdoctoral associate. So we've asked Eleanor to provide some broad context for the film, and then to spend a few minutes in dialogue with Giulia before we open it up to questions from you all. So we'll ask you to remain muted throughout their conversation, and then when we open it up to the group, I'll ask you to type your questions into the chat, and I'll share those with Giulia and Eleanor. And one last thing, if you haven't yet had a chance to see the film, it's totally okay. It will be available to view through the weekend at the link you received by email. And so think of this conversation as an introduction to the film before you view it. We'll also share the recording of today's event on the YouTube channel of one of our partner arts organizations, Works on Water. So thanks to them for making that platform available to us. And thanks to you all for being here. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Eleanor.
Hi, thanks. Thanks, Nicole, for the introductions, and thanks to all of you for being here. I'm really glad to have a chance to speak with Giulia about Strange Fish, and then to be in conversation with all of you about the film and the work of these fishermen, and some of the broader context, and also the things that have happened since the making of the film. And I think, given the range of experiences and interests that our group here today represents, I thought I would open just by offering a few points of common ground for our conversation. So holding in mind that we have people who are very familiar with Mediterranean migration and people who are artists and practitioners in other contexts and have an interest in mobility more generally or in water. And so I'm, in that sense, hoping that if you've already seen the film, our conversation will give you more context and a way to more deeply engage with the film. And as Nicole just said, if you haven't seen it yet, then this will be something you can hold on to and carry into your viewing after today's conversation. I'm going to keep my comments really brief, but I am going to do a screen share so that I can show a few stills from the film while I speak. So, here we go. So Strange Fish, which focuses on the work of these Tunisian fishermen, has us thinking about migration in the central Mediterranean. So the boat crossings of undocumented migrants from Tunisia and Libya towards Italy and Malta. And I've marked on here Zarzis in orange, and then you can see the Italian island of Lampedusa in purple and Malta in yellow. So we're thinking about these this central Mediterranean area. And I think the film—
to interrupt, I'm not sure your screen has yet shared, just FYI.
Oh, thanks. I did the thing of not double checking everything because people get annoyed at all the double checking. And then, can I see some nods? Can anybody see my screen? I see thumbs up.
Okay.
I think I'm good. Okay.
Great.
So I think the film has us thinking about these mobilities and also about the loss of lives at sea, about rescue, and about how we honor the dead. I think it's significant that we're talking about this now. It's Refugee Week, and World Refugee Day is on the 20th. And so I'm holding that in mind as we talk. People are crossing the sea for a variety of reasons, and they're crossing in these rubber dinghies and overcrowded boats that you've probably seen images of. Here we go. And now I'm switching to film stills again. They're fleeing violence, war, persecution, extreme poverty and instability, and a range of situations in their home countries. And in the central Mediterranean, many of those crossing are from countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And more immediately, many of them are fleeing civil conflict or torture and imprisonment in Libya. And they want to apply for asylum and protection in Europe. They also don't have other options. So closed borders, limited visa options often make these dangerous journeys the only way out. And in the film, we hear about how this is true also for young Tunisians. So if you've seen it, you'll recognize this couple whose sons have already crossed and made their way to Italy. And we could talk more in the Q&A about some of these realities. I also want to acknowledge right here at the start that the film has taken on perhaps renewed significance right now. Since this event was organized, responses to the police killings of Black Americans have spurred a global Black Lives Matter movement. And we're seeing demonstrations in cities around the world and a whole set of conversations about what Black Lives Matter means also in non-US contexts. So I'm showing you right now a tweet from the group Alarm Phone, which is a volunteer collective that serves as a point of contact for people who are stranded at sea. And they're drawing attention in this message to the ways in which Europe's border and immigration policies enable the deaths of migrants. And in the central Mediterranean, this includes the mobility of Black subjects to Europe. So I bring this up now. I hope that our conversation can come back to this point. I think the film gives us an entry point to this conversation through the words of the fishermen themselves who describe their work as anti-racist. And I think we also have people on this call who are perhaps involved in some of these efforts on the ground too, so I'd be interested in moving towards that in our discussion. But just to offer a couple more points first, and then I'm going to ask Giulia to come back on. I'm just going to highlight a couple of points that I see as sort of illustrating the significance of the film and helping us reflect on Mediterranean migration. So one of the important reminders the film offers is that irregular or undocumented, I put in scare quotes, illegal migration to Europe didn't suddenly start with the refugee crisis of 2015, although it did increase around that time. In 2017, the year Strange Fish was made, approximately 119,000 people crossed the central Mediterranean route, most of them having left from Libya. And crossings were lower in number before and after, but I think one of the things the film makes clear is that these routes have a much longer history, and we hear that the fishermen have been rescuing since around 2002. So again, something we could take up in the questions. And the film also makes clear that people are at great risk in these crossings. More than 20,000 people have died crossing the seas since 2014. And I think this is a point that perhaps resonates even more with the current Black Lives Matter Say Their Names campaigns, because we often don't know the identities of the people who lose their lives in crossing, and government resources aren't dedicated to recovering or identifying the dead. And that's one reason why the work of this particular group is especially important. One last set of points is that I think the film also makes clear that Tunisia plays a significant role. So even though a majority of departures are from Libya in the central Mediterranean area, Tunisia is an important country both of transit and departure. So for Tunisian citizens who decide to leave, and also for migrants from other countries who come through Tunisia. And the film reminds us Tunisia plays an important role because the routes people take when leaving Libya can bring them into the Tunisian waters where people like the Zarzis fishermen are working. And these departures continue to this day. So these are just a couple of headlines from articles in the last couple of weeks, really. And I think that in the first few months of 2020, pre-pandemic, departures from Tunisia were increasing. So I'm gonna come back to here and mute my phone. I want to come back to Strange Fish. And so I think while the broader context of Mediterranean migration frames and informs the film really focuses on the work and perspective of this group of fishermen. And so I'm going to ask Giulia to open just by talking a little bit more about that group. So Giulia, I wonder if to start us off, you could share a little bit about how you came into contact with the group and how you decided to make the film, maybe a bit more background on your own relationship with the group and how you got started there.
Well, first of all, hello to everybody, and thank you for this opportunity to speak about the movie and about what happened in Zarzis and the work of these people. So first, to answer how all this story happened. So I would take like maybe a small step back and putting the context also of Tunisia and the politics of Tunisia in the context. So 2011 was the beginning of the Arab Springs, and for Tunisia it was the December 2010 when a man set himself on fire because of economical poverty and the lack of future and possibility inside the Tunisian dictatorship of Ben Ali. So after the revolution, it was a possibility for it was the only country, let's say, that began the Arab Springs that could start a democratic process. Very difficult one, because of course, after so many years of dictatorship, to establish democratic institutions, it was not as easy as it could seem. But not only, also an economical and viable state and sustainable state. It was, of course, most of the difficulties that we can still see today after almost 10 years. So this is important because the group of fishermen, it was a group of labor and workers who were before the revolution were just collaborate within each other's in order to have some well-doings in environmental issues inside the artisanal fishery in southern Tunisia. This is because in Tunisia there are different ports, it's differentiated in different parts, and the central part, which is the industrial one and the richest one of Tunisia, is very practiced industrial fisheries, while in the southern part it's more practiced the artisanal fisheries. So after the revolution, for the first time, they could establish an association. So there was a freedom of association that was not in Tunisia before the revolution, and they could start to work within each other and to speak not only within each other but also to institutions. So about the problem of finding people on the road of migration, this is something like that in the movie it's clear, but it's something very, very well reported since a long time. It's happening since 2002, 2003, but even before. So basically, it started when European Union decided to open its internal borders and close the external one. So it was a hard decision because, of course, closing internal border without having a policy for external migrations, it was difficult and tough to implement. So basically, what happened, it was the so-called fortress Europes. So it means the external border are sealed, and people who couldn't apply for visa anymore like they did before, they started this route in the Mediterranean, because actually it's a small sea. So since the beginning of this kind of migration, the boat capsized, people drowned, and because of many reasons, including environmental one and of simply climate reasons, such as streams and the Gulf of this place in Tunisia, bodies and boats who capsized arrived there. So in this small city, people were aware and sensitive to this problem since many years. Sensitive, it means that they could go on beaches and see bodies on there. And I mean, I think that everybody who can imagine to find a body on a shore, it's something that is really impressive. So for example, the main character of this movie, Shamsuddin Marzouk, who took care of the cemetery, I hope that it's really understandable the way that this kind of work could shock and could traumatize also someone who sees. But you could be traumatized and also react. And what happened there is that these people reacted to what happened. So to how all the story began, like just how I found out basically the story. So there was like in 2015-16 when there was this peak of people traveling on the Mediterranean. When there are a lot of people traveling, there is also a lot of boats who capsized. And there was a moment in 2015 when 54 bodies, and they were all Syrians, ashore in Zarzis. So it was a huge number of people. This city is a small city. It was built on a previous colonial French town. So it was several villages agglomerated into one. So basically every village had its own cemetery, and it was a family cemetery. So everyone would take care of his own. When the 54 bodies ashore, the commune of the municipality had to decide what to do with this body. And there is a communal cemetery, but it's still very little and family and familiar one. So there was no place for these people, and families started to complain about it's too many bodies. What can we do? The commune decided to give a piece of land, but because of internal politics of the town, and of course we have to put it in the context. It was after revolution. After revolution, it means many powers in place that want to take advantage of one thing or the other. So because of the internal politics of the commune, the only land who was given for burying these people was on an ancient dump. This story was very little known at the beginning because of many reasons, including that nobody wanted to make publicity of a place like this, because of course it's against human dignity in all sense. But it was known as a matter of we have to solve this problem. So many actors, international actors were involved, like we have to find a way to resolve this problem. So when I went there, I just wanted to know what happened and what was the plan and what would they do about this cemetery. And the cemetery was already full. It was more than 400 bodies in this dump. So it was very impressive place. And it was in that moment, once we were there to report this story, that we understood that the whole city was affected by the migration issues in a very particular way, and the people didn't stay calm. The people really reacted. And this community of fishermen that got associated for a labor purpose, the first purpose is for labor and for working condition of artisanal fishery. They have, the second purpose of this association had to be the condition of fishermen in the context of migration, because they had no other choices. When they go out at sea, they would see boats of people, and when there is no stability and no clarity about what kind of institution has to take care and who will take care of these people, of course the fisherman was the first line. So the association, when it was born, they had these two facets, and they kept these two facets all along. And it means that for every job, or a job of a fisherman town, of course, a coastal town in the southern Tunisia, was affected by migration, and in a way that it was unexpected for an external viewer. So this is more or less the context on how we found this story at the beginning.
Thanks, Giulia. I'm interested. So you were there initially as a journalist, but the film that tells the story of this group of fishermen and the kind of work that they do, and it moves both between their work as fishermen and scenes that are filmed in the cemetery itself, thinking about that part of their work. And it's not, you were there as a journalist, but this is not a typical news reportage kind of documentary. And so I wondered if you could talk also a little bit about some of the decisions you made in building this as a visual narrative. So I'm struck, for example, by the ways in which we often, when we come across, this is a story that hasn't been told very widely, but when we come across stories of migrants at sea, it's often told in ways that kind of amplify the spectacle of migration, so that draw attention to a mass of anonymous people, or focus on the dead in very physical ways. And your film, although it is telling that story and it's about those circumstances, we see a lot of shots of the act of fishing and of pulling up nets, and of shots of the sea and of fish. And so I wondered if you could talk about how you made some of these decisions about what to show and what not to show.
Okay, well, yes, this it was a very hard question, like what are you allowed to show and why? And I guess it's the why that it was the most relevant one. So I don't know, I guess that to answer this, the best way is like why we chose to give this name Strange Fish to this movie. And because I guess it's the angle on which we decided many of the scenes, both of images and of narratives. So we chose this title because of the song Strange Fruit. I mean the poem Strange Fruit, and of this poem we wanted to make the analogy on the Mediterranean, and mostly on the objectification and indifference. So in Strange Fruit, there were people hanging on trees, and people passing by would see them as objects, like they were fruits. They were used to see them. And in Mediterranean and in Italy specifically, but not only in Italy, but I would say specifically in Italy, people are so used to hear stories about boat capsized in the sea with people generically that they really are objects now. So this was the starting point. How can you tell a story without objectifying anyone? And we didn't want to show bodies for this reason. And it was the big question also was, should we show at the end what is an emergency in the sea? And I guess this was my choice, because my producer were really against it, to show what is an emergency with boats in the sea. For me, it was important to show it because since in all the movie we are inside a community, and their not only their will to do something, but also their fear, because they're scared. They tell him many times, like, we're scared to go at sea. Sometimes we smell this very strong smell at sea, and it's weird. And it's when you know how it is going out at sea, like so many miles from the coast, it's really particular and peculiar to imagine to smell something like that in the middle of the water. So for me, it was important to show, because I was scared that at the end of this story, I wanted to make sure that the gap between a fisherman boat and what an emergency at sea looks like wouldn't match. Like, okay, they are fishermen, they know how to do, and so it's easy. And so I wanted to make this difference, because when you see the boat where they work, their daily life, you understand that it's impossible to make a rescue at sea in that condition. It's impossible. I mean, it's really difficult. So the decision to show or not is, first of all, for the one I told, like, not, it was really important not to objectify anyone, and also like the decision to show the work of the fishermen. This is a bit like how would you say, like the trademark, if you want, of the work we all have done in my collective as well. So we do a kind of journalism that is basis journalism. So we find micro stories, small stories of everyday life. I mean, we usually don't look for spectacular people or very well-known people, but more on what can we do as citizens in everyday life. So for in this angle, it was extremely important that their real life is not rescuing people, it's being fishermen. That's their life. Then because they are there, because they were born there, they happened to be in the middle of this and they decided to act. But it was not, they didn't go there on purpose. That was only their life that brought them there. And yeah, I don't know if I answered all there.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful perspective, especially in highlighting that contrast between the scenes that we see where there's, I guess we also see them standing on the empty boats in the boat cemetery as well. And so the contrast between the wreckage that washes ashore after the migrant boats capsize in their own working boats, and then the scene you're referring to where there's a big rescue operation that you show near the end of the film. And you see there it's a whole different situation with in terms of equipment and size and what's available in the team. And that's something we could also come back to, because questions of rescue have become especially contentious in recent years. I mean, I guess they always have been and have fluctuated. But I think in recent months, I know that because of the COVID-19 pandemic, rescue in many had basically stopped in the Mediterranean, and only now in recent weeks have we seen rescue boats returning to sea. So I wondered if you could also say something. I'm just going to ask you one more question now, and then I'm curious to hear from if people who are here with us, if you want to just think, if you have questions, we could start taking them in the chat, I think, and then. Oh, I see some people are already typing there, so it's great. But I would ask you to say one thing about maybe what's happened since. And I know that, I guess I'm asking both about what's happened with the cemetery since the film was made. It came out just a couple of years ago. And also, I know that the film itself played an important role in something that happened to the fishermen subsequently. So could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, so about the cemetery, of course the situation evolved, but for very practical reason, and also for the international attention to it. So for the practical reason, it was simply because that cemetery was full. So while we were doing the last shootings, so it was late 2017 for the really last shootings, there were like a small slot of land, like for maybe 2 people left. And then it was full. It was full. It meant that people should have been buried on layers if they kept using it. So this was one reason, and I know they did for a while. They did for a while in layers. But after that, there was an international attention. There has been a crowdfunding campaign, both in Tunisia and in Europe, and actually many people from all around the world supported his work. Shamseddin managed to go on. He managed to go to European Parliament. Then he managed to go to Geneva for the Forum of Human Rights. So he has been a bit everywhere for a while. People got really interested in helping out. And at the end, they managed to buy a lot of land where he built a small ceremony house where they could do at least I don't know what kind of ceremony because he told me that it's mixed ceremony, but I'm not sure what actually it is in practice, and where there are many other burials. So they already start using another cemetery, and but as for the fishermen. So in September 2018, it was the period where Salvini was the Minister of Interior in Italy, and Salvini, I don't know if I can make the parallel, but he's like the Italian Trump, or kind of. I mean, I guess not as entrepreneur as Trump, but let's say from the same family, political family, and he got power on the issue of migration, and this was his campaign was based on that. So all his speech was based only on the problem of migration in Italy, and of course it was a sensitive problematic since many years, and people voted for him. So of course, because of the need for him of very sensational also actions, it was the summer where many people got arrested, included the mayor of a southern town called Riace, who was actually one of the city were experimenting a different kind of integration of recent migrations. And it was pretty, I mean, it was an example used by many cities around Europe. So for example, he got arrested in that time. And after a few months, the same fisherman, I mean, the president of the association and his crew got arrested near Sicily. So they got arrested because they were involved in a rescue of a small boat, in this case, a small boat with 14 people on board. That was from Tunisia. So it was not a boat from Libya, but was crossing from Tunisia. They had a hole in the boat, so the boat was going underwater. They decided, I mean, it was the technicality of this process was really, it's complicated, like in every process that go up to a case. But basically they had them, and a Frontex airplane saw them. The Italian Coast Guard got notified, and they were arrested. So it took them 1 month in prison, and 3 months the boat was seized by the Italian authorities. So
to clarify, sorry to interrupt, Giulia, but what they were arrested, I assume, for human trafficking or smuggling.
Smuggling, yeah, for smuggling. So so it took like 1 month, and actually it was the month where the movie was released. So the movie entered into the case in court, and of course Shamseddin Bourassin is the president of, it was, because now he's not anymore, it changed the presidency, but it was the president of the Association of Fishermen, which became after that a connector for the artisanal fishery in Tunisia. So he was very busy, actually. He was well known at that time. He was a known person. He was known from the international organizations. He was known that his work in rescuing. He was known, above all, his work in preventing illegal migration for young citizens from Tunisia, because of course they all have young people, children, or nephews, that at one point or the other they want to leave. The Association of Fishermen, they were all very scared of this. So they were like, for 9 years they were making projects, programs for the youth, both for to get internship and trainship for their work, but also for sensibilization and awareness of what this kind of migration can do. So I mean, because of only his work and because of the condition of what happened, they were released. But it was a very tense time, and after that, everyone was scared. After that, NGOs were captain of NGOs both were arrested. This period is not over, and I mean, it didn't start with a Ministry of Interior of a far-right party. It started even before. It's a tense subject, a very sensitive subject that nobody really take a lead in proposing solutions, but only problems. So it's very helpful for politicians for sure, because we know it's much easier to find an enemy and an easy enemy instead of solving the problem. That's for sure. But it's a very complicated problem. For in any case, it's a European. Europe is not one state. It has not one decision maker. Of course, we are talking about external border. It's extremely complicated subject, and of course, in an extremely complicated subject and in an internal political panorama like this one, the one who were targeted at that time were the one involved in rescued. They became the enemy number one.
Thanks, Giulia. I want to sort of with that in mind, and we've moved now into the present, but we could certainly go back to some of the specifics of the film. And there are plenty of parts of the film that we haven't even talked about. For example, the demonstration that we see also near the end of the film, where the fishermen are protesting a fascist or neo-fascist group that is bringing a boat to come refuel, and the fishermen in Zarzis are preventing them from coming. That's something we could talk about. But I just thought, let's open it up to questions. And maybe the way to do this is you can type your question into the chat and we can take it from there. If anybody has a question that they would really like to vocalize, we have this as a conversation also, so that you could maybe wave, and we can ask you to just ask your question out loud, so we can get a little more conversation going. I'm looking through to see if I see anybody waving. Otherwise, I have lots more questions, but I want to give space to you all. Yes, I see the name Carlin.
Hi, yeah. I'm on, right? You all can hear me. Okay. Thank you so much for organizing this. It's really a pleasure. I'm always curious especially with nonfiction films and documentaries, and I'm coming from an oral history background, what the reaction was of the narrators and the folks involved in the film, the fishermen, their reaction to the film itself and seeing it, and sort of what their response was. If you could share a little bit about that.
You mean the answer is from the Shamsuddin, the fisherman? Okay. Well, Shamsuddin Maizuk, he came many times in many festivals with me, and he's very emotional. He cried when he saw it. It was very. I mean, he was happy. He was happy to see it. The fisherman, Shamsuddin Bourassin, is a more difficult character. He was very close at the beginning. It was very difficult for him to open. I mean, it was very difficult for him to open up with someone else that was filming. It was hard to get him through. And actually, it was the moment where there was the demonstrations against the boat rent out by the identitarian movement, which is a French movement that actually got franchised a bit everywhere in Europe. So they rent out this boat, and their purpose was to go around in the Mediterranean to make disturb action against NGOs rescuing migrants. So when they knew that this boat wanted to come to Zarzis to get fuel, they make this, I mean, very spontaneous demonstration. And I guess that was the moment where the fishermen were open up a bit more, and they got in touch. They trusted. They got trust for us that we're filming. It was, it took like several months let's say. So that was the moment where they started to trust us. After that, when they saw the movie, I mean, it was I don't know if they how they see themselves there inside the movie. I'm not sure, because of course I can report only what they said. They were happy, and they were proud, and of course they were happy because the movie was useful to them. I mean, when they got arrested, they had many kind of proofs, of course, but this was a proof public, let's say, because the other proofs that they could have, that they were working with the international organization, international NGOs, so they already had all this kind of credibility for that in the courtroom could be useful. But this movie brought also some kind of credibility to the broader public, which they needed, because in the broader public was extremely against migration, against rescuing at sea at that moment. So they really needed something that proved that to the public that they were not smugglers. I mean, unfortunately, it works like this, like the shaming on a newspaper, it could last many times. So I guess that for all this reason, they told me they were really happy, and it was like their world as they see it. It was depicted in the way they wanted. But then, if they were just lying, I don't know.
Giulia, just to follow up on this, I also really appreciate the question about how you think about, I mean, you yourself brought up questions of representation. So how you think about representing their perspectives. And one of the ways that I saw it was also that you yourself aren't present. We don't see you in the film. And I thought that was also an interesting choice on your part. So it's really focusing on them, although of course you're there as the maker and the person who then goes in and edits and puts it together. But I also wondered about then another way of thinking about it might be what happens afterwards. So you mentioned the court case and how the film played a role. And have you also shown the film in Zarzis to audiences there?
Not yet.
Okay.
No, not yet. We tried, I mean, of course they all saw it online. And then we tried many times to make like a public screening, but it was difficult because there was no cinema, and so I mean there is no cinema room, and so we had to find like a small rooms, and I mean it was not easy. So finally we didn't make a public screening there.
I want to. I see a question in the chat. It's Roy Lee's question about what we can do in response. I wonder if we can hold off on that question because I think it's a really important one, and I wonder if other people wanted to ask things out loud about some of the specifics of the film or the context. If we could get a couple more of those questions in first before we take up this really important point. Anybody else waving a hand, or you want to type something in? I see Harry's hand.
Hi, thanks so much for this conversation. It's really fascinating. I have a very, very specific question about the film. There's one scene where it looks like the leaders of the Fishermen's Collective are having a sort of planning meeting in a conference space, and it's like 6 men around a table, and there's also one woman sitting with them. So I know the fishing industry is very masculine, right, in Tunisia and elsewhere. I'm just wondering about this woman who's at the table with them. What's her role, and how did she come to be present?
Yeah, actually, I mean, there are 2 women inside the association. I mean, they are the one. The title is the secretary of the association. For in reality, they do a bit everything. Like they do their communication, their relation to the media, their relations to the institutions. So they are the one who are in the office, and I mean, Iman, she's an angel basically. you call her and say, where are, because of course it's very difficult to to be in touch with, I mean, if you know the fishing industry, like maybe you call and the fisherman is out for 5 or 6 days and you don't know when he come back, and so she's the one who take care of everything. But of course she has a role behind the curtains.
You brought up the question here of labor as well, and Harry, you mentioned this, that it's mostly men who are involved in the fishing industry, and I wondered, I'm sort of shifting gears, but using that as a sort of pivot point. I wondered if one of the things that the film had me thinking about a lot is the ways in which the act of rescue and the act of burial, which are arguably very different. I mean, they can exist also in very different realms. How those two kinds of work become part of the everyday labor of these fishermen. And I wondered if you could say a little bit more about, and we see it a little bit in the film, but I wonder if you could say something more about just how integrated that is into how they understand their everyday labor, and how maybe it has changed their work. Could you just say a little bit more about that?
Mm-hmm. So you mean what it practically means for them, okay, to be affected by the, okay, so like very practical issues. So for example, many of the fishermen who's fishing bluefish and bluefish, yes, basically bluefish and gambas. You say, can you say
like shrimp?
Yeah, the big shrimps. So to fish this kind of fishery, you have to go a bit far, like 180 miles from the coast. Most of the fishermen in the Mediterranean, so not only Tunisian, but Egyptian, Libyan, Tunisian, Italian, Maltese, they would go in a zone near, in the center, near also the Libyan seas. And this for many reasons, and mostly because it's very rich of shrimps, the red one, and also of red tuna, which is a very precious kind of fish, which has quota, because it's different fishing in the Mediterranean than fishing in the Atlantic. There are much more rules to respect of quota, or how many fish you can fish in what kind of zones. It's very regulated. So Tunisian fishermen in particular, they were fishing in this zone. When the civil war started in Libya, and I mean, it escalated in the time and changed also the actors in the time. For many years, it was smugglers and Libyan coast guards patrolling a huge area along the Libyan coast. It's a very long-term contentious in Mediterranean about how many miles from the Gulf of Sirte in Libya it's the territory of Libya. I will not enter in this because it's a diplomatic issue since 2005. But anyway, once the civil war started, they claim all this area. So they clear all this area for all the fishermen from other countries, and patrolling this with smugglers and the Libyan Coast Guard. So it happened in the years many times that the Tunisian fishermen got shot or kidnapped. And when they are kidnapped the people, and the boat are seized by the Libyans, smuggler or coast guard, depending, and then they ask for a ransom to the Tunisian state, which in most of the case they gave the ransom to take back the people, but not the boat, which are usually used again for smuggling migrants. So for this reason, a long story for short, but for this reason, they had to change the place where they go to fish. So this already is something that affected their work. So they changed and they went more closer to Lampedusa, so western from what they usually went. So closer to Lampedusa, it means that they are really on the road that pass from Libya to Lampedusa, which actually it's like a parallel from Lampedusa to Libya, and that is a parallel to Tunisia. So wherever you go at that zone, you will be on this road. So what happened in practice is if they see, and it changed a lot at the time, since 2016, 17, if they see someone at sea, they would take them on board. Why? Because from the Tunisian side, after revolution, it was not clear who would have been called in case of emergency at sea. It should have been Tunisian Coast Guard, but it was not clear. So at that time, they would, in practice, if they are inside Tunisian water, it would be the Tunisian Coast Guard, but they didn't come for a very long time. So they would take them on board and bring them to Tunisia. If they're in international water, they have to. It's a whole different process, which is calling the RMCC, the coordinator in Rome, that would dispatch for depending on what boat is closer and would come. Usually, this kind of operation it take hours, many hours. It has a great impact on your working day. So if the boat you see is capsizing and is drowning, you take the people on board, you cannot work anymore, or it's very hard to work. You don't have, many times you don't have enough water or food for everyone. So the fishermen started to go, when they go fishing, they would put extra water, extra milk, because there are many times women, small children that are taken on board, and food, extra food, in case they find someone. They started to make also training, like how would you take people on board in that case? Because it seems obvious, but it's really not. So it happened one accident where they didn't know how to take people on board, so they make the small boat, and this one was a rubber boat. They make it approach to the big fishing boat and start one by one bringing people on board. But of course, the problem in this kind of rescue operation is fear, anxiety. It's super scary. It's very dangerous. So there are many people who panic completely. And when there is panic in the water, it's a real problem. It's underestimated. And so, for example, in that time, they didn't know how to manage the fear, and someone got attached to a part of the boat. He got smashed between the two boats. There was waves. He was impossible to find him later. So after this episode, every fisherman got rescue training. How to manage a boat. I mean, to pass from one small boat to a bigger boat. How would you do that without compromising? So yes, as the working routine, it affected completely everything.
Thank you. So,
jump in here. Sorry to jump in. Thank you. I see that we've come to the end of our time, so I don't want to cut off the conversation, but I do think we can kind of bring it to a close. And I'm very grateful to you, Giulia and Eleanor, for speaking with us. I want to just sort of address briefly Roy's question. And Roy, thank you for this question in the chat. You're thinking about what we can do, sort of those of us on the call, and perhaps those of us with various forms of privilege. How can we oppose sort of anti-Black racism? And I think it's a really important question. And I just, what struck me about the film, and I'm hearing it both from you, Giulia, and you, Eleanor, I just want to underscore the ways in which the work of anti-racism is folded into the daily maritime labor of these fishermen. That's something that really struck me about the film, is that they were sort of doing these practices within the space of their daily life and their daily work. And that seems significant to me. And it's prompted me to think about the ways in which sort of the everydayness of my own life might incorporate the work of collective care and mutual aid and forms of anti-racism. So that's something on my mind. Before we go, is there anything that you would want to add to that, Eleanor or Giulia, as you sort of think about that question?
Giulia, I'll let you go first if you have something.
Well, I think it's the questions that everybody is trying to pose himself. I mean, it's the question now. I mean, and it has been what can we do in reality? And I mean, these kind of actions of these kind of people, it's something that I hope that gives hope to everybody, in the sense that whatever you do in your life, it's small acts that actually can change. A small act in your everyday life, it would change an attitude, it would change. But also bigger acts, of course, is welcome. But I mean, we can do, if we manage to change ourselves, it's already something, I think.
I would just add quickly, and I also, in respecting the time, and thank you so much to those of you who have to sign off, I would just add that I think we haven't talked overtly about some of the ways that what's happening in the Mediterranean has clear parallels with what's happening in other contexts around the globe. But we could certainly go there. And I think you've done it in offering us this title, which compares what the ways in which European border and immigration policies are enabling the deaths of migrants at sea, to the lynchings of Black Americans in the US context. And I think with that in mind, one of the answers to the question, what can we do, is also a very local question. And so thinking about how some of these same issues manifest in our own small radius, I think can also be a really useful exercise. And thanks for the question. I think Nicole, Underwater New York, is also sending out a follow-up that might have some helpful resources. So that's something to look out for if you're thinking about that part of the question too.
Yeah, we're putting together just a very brief list of resources for if you want to learn more about this area of the world, about this work. So we hope that that's helpful to you, and we hope that we can continue this conversation. So I want to thank you all for joining us today, and thank you again, Giulia and Eleanor. This has been a really rich conversation, and I'm very grateful to you both for taking the time to speak with us. So thanks, everyone. Have a
thank you. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you.